Well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 204 of Retro Power and Cut. And you join me just very shortly before our grand opening event at the Den, which is looking like it might be quite busy. But back down to earth and here in the fabrication shop. The first thing I'm going to start with is a car that isn't next to me. It's a car that arrived this week. Which is an upcoming project, which is the Aston Martin DBS project that we will be undertaking. It is a Restomod project that we will be doing, and there'll be lots more to see on that in the future. Obviously, I'm not going to reveal everything just yet, but needless to say, we're pretty excited about it. Aston Martin is a first for us to be working on. I think the car is pretty much universally liked amongst the ranks of Retro Power, and certainly by me and Cal. And yeah, it should form a pretty good blank canvas for the basis of a really good project. So yeah, watch this space on that one. Lots to find out about. Moving on to cars that are in the workshop. The Jaguar XJC, Project Portofino as it's called. Two major areas of work going on. One, the bonnet, and two, the rear bumpers, or the rear bumper rather. The rear bumper, Tom's off at the moment, but Tom had been working on that towards the latter end of last week, and he's getting to the point where that is all welded together, and he's getting that trimmed up to then sit correctly to the body line. So that's basically the bumper's been narrowed and moved closer to the body and then remounted on some new mountings, and it's been all trimmed so that trimmed all the way around its periphery so that it sits neatly up against the body line around the rear of the car, and that necessitates quite a lot of trial fitting, removing, all of that just to get that line all correct. But that's progressed pretty well. I haven't actually looked at that since I've been back here. I've been working quite a lot at the Den, so I haven't actually seen exactly how that's sitting, but I think he's getting pretty well through that process now. And then moving on to the bonnet. Matt has got the skin on. I think he put that on yesterday. Recall from previous episodes, he'd got the bonnet skin pretty much ready to fit, and you may recall that was a new old stock Jaguar bonnet skin that we'd speculated a little bit about its origins. Well, it seems to fit pretty well. There's bits of fettling going on, as you can see. He's doing a little bit of lead work to improve the grille aperture and a few bits of tidying, but we got the bonnet skin was blasted. I'm going to hand over to Mark in a bit to explain about what Mark's been up to, but amongst the jobs that Mark did, blasting the bonnet skin was one of the bonnet interior frame. The bonnet inner frame was one of them. So Mark got that all blasted and epoxy primed last week, ready for the bonnet skin to be fitted. So Matt has now got on and got the bonnet skin fitted, temporarily screwed in place with self-tapping screws, trial fitted, made sure all the gaps are reasonably good, got the wings adjusted, got everything adjusted so that it could be trialed and made sure that the fit was good. Then at that point, the screws are removed, the screw holes are plug welded, spot welds are applied around the bits of the bonnet that can be spot welded. Basically, it's all assembled, and now Matt's got it lodged in place again, doing a bit more trial fitting. He's got the wooden blocks out, knocking bits down, pulling bits up, generally getting everything pushed and pulled into place. It's a fairly brutal operation at times, getting that right, but that's pretty much all good now. He's got that fitting pretty well. There's a few areas where he's had to modify the edges very slightly, but nothing too drastic. Fairly straightforward, I think, from what I've seen and heard going on. And that's where we're at on Portofino. Moving on, I'd love to be able to talk about Wasabi project, but I can't, because in terms of metalwork, there's nothing really to report on that at the moment. It will be progressing forward just as soon as I can be back here a little bit more, which will basically be as of next week. So I can get some time back on this car again then and get that moving forward, but my time has been somewhat at a premium due to getting things at the Den in a place to move forward. So that's nothing too dramatically changed there. Nothing too dramatically changed on the E-Type because we are awaiting the rear body, which I said this last week, I'll say it again this week, I think it is very imminent. I don't quite know where we're at on that, but it should be here very soon. I'm going to pause standing here because there was a car here, which Mark's going to talk about, which was the Cosworth. However, I'll talk a bit about it first because one of the other jobs that Matt has done this week was the metal repair work. You may recall last week we looked at the shell and there were quite a few areas that needed some repair work. A shame for a new old stock shell, but then not too surprising given that it's been stored for somewhere in the region of 35 years in a barn, not getting rain on it, but certainly in the elements to some extent, with only the factory primer to preserve it. So rust had set in a fair few areas. So following blasting, we needed to repair the lower edge of both of the front chassis rails. The outer skin there had come away around the spot welds and had gone a little bit frilly. It was still kind of there, but it wasn't great. So we just took that line of spot welds off. Matt's taken that line of spot welds off, removed that lower edge of the outermost skin of the rail at that point, which is the inner wing pressing, and replaced that bottom edge. So that solved that problem. There was a dirt shield retaining tab, which is part of one of the inner rear wheel well pressings that had rusted off, which I imagine on a road car must rust off in about 5 minutes because they're incredibly thin and tiny piece of metal right in the worst dirt trap area on the car. So I'm amazed they lasted any time at all. But one side was intact, one side wasn't. So Matt's mended the side that wasn't intact by replicating the other side, so that's good. And then the spare wheel well, around the plug holes in the spare wheel well, the old tin worm had a good go at that, and there was quite a bit of corrosion around 3 of the paint drain holes in the spare wheel well. So he's made a little press tool, pressed some pieces, pressed a section to replicate those original paint drain holes, and then replaced quite a chunk of the spare wheel well, actually one large piece and then a couple of sections around the paint drain holes. So done a nice job of that. And then I think the only other area of corrosion was the sills. On one side, Matt managed to just weld up a few little pinholes because all the corrosion was from the outside in, unusually not from the inside out, but because of the storage, but non-road use, the corrosion was from the outside in. So anything that cleaned up to appear okay on the outside is actually okay. He managed to locally weld up 1 or 2 pinholes in the sill one side. The opposite side, it needed a lower section making for quite a chunk of the sill the other side. So Matt's just folded up a new section to replace just a lower, probably about 2 inches of a large section of the sill on the opposite side of the car. I can't remember which side's which now, but a chunk of the sill was replaced on the other side and re-spot welded in place. And that pretty much wrapped up the corrosion damage. Matt's then done a bit of straightening because the car had been picked up either by some long tines on a forklift or by an overhead crane or something through the door tops and through the rear window apertures, which had bent the flanges in the window apertures and bent the flanges in the top of the door. So Matt straightened those out and got all that back to how it should be. And there was a couple of bits of damage around the framework of the windscreen as well, which he straightened out. And then at that point, that's a really good moment to hand over to Mark, because Mark then picked up where Matt had left off on the metalwork. Mark's then picked up getting that to the next stage of work. So over to Mark, he'll let you know what the body shop have been working on, also all on the Cosworth.
All right, welcome back to another episode. Been a busy week again this week. Cosy went back in the blast booth yesterday. I managed to do the final media blast. Took me 2 hours of hoovering out, so that's the only downfall with the media blast, sandblasting, is the sand gets everywhere. So I had to keep turning it over. I made a little attachment for the hoover to go suck in all the little sill areas because it just keeps getting trapped, but you got to turn it over, hoover it, turn it back the other way. Every time you see sand, some people just try and blow it out, but you just blow it back into all the crevices. So yeah, so 2 hours of that, got it in here. And I think it was a good 2 hours to put the epoxy protection coat on it. This will now be sanded down. I think we're just 120 this now, all over the main shell. We're going to get it back in for 2 coats of reface, which is polyester. It's basically just spray on filler, but we're only going to go gentle on it because it's so good. There's no dents, just slight little ripples here and there. just slight feel to it. So yeah, we'll get 2 coats of that on it. We'll block that down. Start with 120, 180, 320. Just make sure all the guide coat's gone. Then it'll be back in for the primer. And then after we've primed it, we're going to prep inside, the underside. Inside's going to be sprayed body colour. Just how Ford would have done it, blow it over. Underside, still got the original factory sealer on it because we left that on. We're just going to prep round that, just tied up a bit to where we have to do some metal work, because obviously you've seen last week we had some metal work sections. And then we're going to wrap to that body colour, which ain't factory, but it will protect it in the long run, because we were going to hot zinc spray it, but we couldn't with all the underseal underneath, because it trying to like stick in places, we don't want to risk it. So yeah, then it'll be out, prep the engine bay. The engine bay's good. Just got to tidy up all this sealer here, put the original factory sealer back in. That'll be ready to go. And yeah, steam full ahead on the final stage, then the painting and then polishing. It's looking good, it's looking good. We'll have a quick look now in body prep. Which way do you want to go, Jamie? And also I've been busy doing some Paul Hollywood step-in for him, because everyone's clicked on the comments that I'm obviously his double. So yeah, I've been busy with that this week on Bake Off. Off Jamie. Alright. So in here, Gaz is doing nothing, he's on his phone as usual. Steve's wet flatted the bumpers, they're ready to rip. I'm on with dry sanding this 320, then I'll do wet flat 800. Bumper bars done, ready to go back in. Black direct, PU for short. Steve's prepping the whale tail here, 320, then here 800 wet flat that'll be ready. Gaz has been soldering on with, these are in pretty bad shape. They've been paying more, I think he's had to do some repairs on some of them, but they're hard to get, so we're just going to repair them. So that one's got to be primered still. The other ones are over there primered and wet flatted already, they're done. So we're soldering on. Grills just needs wet flatting, that's done. Boot lid's done over there, that just needs, what is that? Is that primered, Steve? Yeah, that's done, that's ready. Doors there have got to be polyestered over here. I don't want to hold on to this anymore. So yeah, they've got to be polyestered. We're going to do them on the car, so all together. Bonnet's got to be polyestered now, which is all done. So yeah, that's it this week in the body shop. Next week, show more progress. So I'll see you next time.
Right, thank you, Mark. And then it's over to the Interceptor, which is craning down at me from its lofty position now, because this is just at the point where we're starting to strip it down for its final underside welding and then on into body prep. There has been work on all manner of fronts, several of which I will forget, I'm quite sure. I know that Bobby is working on the headlight arrangement at the moment, because something had failed to have been thought about on the car, and the headlights weren't correctly mounted. There basically weren't really mountings in place for the headlights. So Bobby has created mountings for the headlights and has been busy welding those into place so that we actually can adjust them and they are mounted correctly. So Bobby's been working on that. Stu has been working on the very, very finalisation of a few bits on the tailgate, getting all the trims to fit properly on the tailgate and getting that to latch correctly and do all the things it needs to do. And then moved on to just lots and lots of finishing off bits. So finishing off the door uppers and making sure that the adjustments are available and correct for the door upper frames. Going over with Richard some of the interior parts and working out mountings for things and making sure things fit in terms of interior parts, making sure provisioning is in for wiring in all areas. There are one or two bits where wiring provisions needed to be added in terms of getting wiring in and out of the doors and in and out of the A-pillars and that type of thing, so that's been going on. Also making sure that all the dashboard provisions are in place and that mountings are in place for everything around the dash, trial fitting some of the 3D printed parts there and just making sure things fit, making sure that the upper dash all still fits, because everything's been in and out of the car many times, just double checking and making sure that all of the parts fit there. And then I think pretty much now we're at the stage where we're taking things off, and I've seen Stu bustling backwards and forwards this morning, removing trims, taping them up, bagging up fasteners, labelling fasteners, getting all the parts he's removing off the car, onto the shelf, and all labelled so that we know what they are. And then at a point further down the line, they'll all be reviewed, all of those parts, and checked for final condition. And probably in a large number of cases, then replacements will need to be sourced, or they'll need rework, or new parts. Basically there'll be a review of every part then further down the line on the shelf by Adam and probably Cal. But at the moment, Stu's just getting everything back on the shelf, labelled and bagged and tagged so that we know what everything is, regardless of its condition at the moment. That's just how we work on that front. It's been a hard task, this car, from that point of view, in that we picked it up as a part finished project and a pile of parts, some of which were for this car, some of which were for other cars. And that's made things a little bit challenging and a little bit more time consuming than they would normally be. But that's where we're at on that. So yeah, the next phase really is Bobby finishing off what he was doing, which I think he pretty much has, and then I think it's major heavy bits out, engine and gearbox out, rear axle assembly out. We've got some work still to do on the rear axle assembly, we've got some bits of work to do on the chassis, and then we need to work out a rollover jig for this car, which is another question area, because the normal way we would mount a body shell on the rotisserie is not really going to work with this shell due to its weight and its overhangs. I don't really want to mount it on a rotisserie in the way I would normally do so. So we need to scratch our heads and come up with a piece of engineering to do that hopefully doesn't take too long to effect, so it's not too expensive, but it isn't going to be a 5-minute task either to sort that. But that's where that's going next. That's the next stages on that. And I think at that point, that pretty much wraps up where everything's at in fabrication shop. Hopefully next week I can get back on with doing some fabrication and some engineering and some car related stuff rather than buildings and facilities. But on that note, I'm going to hand over to Cal and he'll appraise you of the assembly shop and take you on down to the den.
Master. Right, thank you very much, Nathaniel. It's a bit manic this week because we're building up to our launch event on Saturday, which will have already happened by the time you watch this. Hopefully we're still alive at this point. But in the meantime, I'll show you what we've been up to. So Gibbo over there has donned the suit of misery to do sanding of carbon fibre. For the boot lid on this, we are tackling the bonnet and boot, which are a bit delayed getting to us, the carbon fibre bonnet and boot. And they come here in 2 halves, and it was very intentional that they came here as an inner and outer, so that the bond, so we could basically control the shape of them during the bonding, because the bonding agent that's used is incredibly stiff, and if they get bonded with a slight twist or incorrect shape on them, they don't match up with the car. So we are bonding them basically in situ, which we did on Project 1. If you go back quite a few episodes, you'd see that happening on that car previously. We've got the inner kind of trimmed to size and attached to the hinges, so we're happy with that, and the latch attached, so we can basically latch the actual bonnet inner skin. And then Gibbo is just in the process of fettling the shape of the outer to get that perfect, and once we've got all the gaps sitting good and everything good, we will then clamp everything in situ with it actually on the car, so we can make sure the shape is perfect whilst it's being clamped and bonded. And what we do is we use like a 2-part epoxy bonding agent around the edge, which sets absolutely hard, and so you can actually sand the edges even if there's any squodge through, as it's technically known in the trade, and you can sand the edges, but the areas where the sort of reinforcement frame would be if it was a steel bonnet, those ones we leave with like a polyurethane bonding agent on there, to avoid any kind of deformation of the shape of the outer skin, because if you use a very rigid bonding agent there, as it tends to shrink, it'll pull slight divots into the shape of it, which you then would have to fill. I mean, if it was a visual weave car, it would be all game over at that point, but in the case of a painted one, obviously you've got a little bit of margin for a skim, but you don't want to put so much filler in. The panel weighs more than what a steel one would have done. And then we'll be following suit with the bonnet. So that's where we're at with that. Allegro, number 1, number 2, nobody knows these days, but the orange Allegro is very rapidly catching up the Harvest Gold Allegro. Anthony's been smashing on with this week, and all those ducks that we've got in a row over the preceding weeks have paid off very nicely. So rear suspension's all in, brakes are on, same at the front, all of the steering's in, the rack's on, steering column's in, pedal box I can see is resting in there ready to fit. I think one of the reasons that's in there is because Alex has been doing his mock-up rope plume, as he'd call it, So that is, we get all the electrical components into place in the car and then lay out the routing of the wiring and rope, make sure we're happy with the bends on everything, the way the wiring sweeps around, so there's no awkward kinks or bends in the wire. And when it's happy with that, it takes it all out, puts it upstairs. I think it's now laid out on the wiring loom construction table up there, ready. Transfer the measurements from the rope loom into the rapid harness software, which is what he uses to design the actual layout of the loom. So he can put all the dimensions on there, and then the sort of final piece of the puzzle will then be taking the wires as they are denoted within rapid harness in terms of colour and gauge, and then going, okay, cutting that section of wire, laying it out on the sort of pattern that's been put out on the board, repeating that for every single wire in the loom, and simply terminating it all and putting it in the car, which is much easier said than done. But we'll be very excited to see those looms come together, and yeah, start piecing these cars together some more. I think other bits we've been on with on these, earlier in the week, Anthony had this one outside to do the wax oil. We've done it last week on the other one. So this one's wax oiled now as well. I think James has been getting the wiper. He'd finally calmed down from the stress of putting the wiper assembly into, I think it was this one first actually, and got to the point where he felt sufficiently refreshed enough to tackle the second car and get the wiper. I think, are they called Bundy tubes? I feel they might be, but basically the tubes that the little rack that slips up and down to operate the wiper boxes on these Lucas wiper assemblies. So that's all going rather nicely. Moving on from that, what Luke has been on with is a load of interior design stuff for Project Portofino, the XJC. So last week we saw him scanning the interior of the cockpit in the dash area. He scanned the Vintage Air Generation 5 HVAC unit that we're using. He scanned the dash top, the original dash fascia, and the original centre console, because we're using the kind of rough outline of all of that. You've got to remember, Project Portofino is quite a subtle modification project. That probably goes throughout the whole of the car. It's very subtle in its execution. And as with a lot of these design projects, we're basically taking the brief that the customer's given us, adding our own elements to it, putting our own spin on it, and then perhaps introducing some things they might not have thought of around the core description that they've provided. And that's an interesting thing about design, is that we don't necessarily need people to say, yes, I want this speedo, this switch, this, and go through the individual components. It's not about that at all, really. It's about understanding the overall vision of it, and often we'll start with something like a mood board. Now, this customer had kind of given me some cues on perhaps a nod to backdating it more like almost like an E-Type dash or a Series 1 XJ, and we've sort of picked up on that one a little bit more. Because on the Series 1, there was the 4 auxiliary gauges were in the centre of the dash rather than each side of the tacho and speedo, as it was on the Series 2, which is actually the XJC is based on a Series 2. Series 2, you had 2 stalks on the column, quite a chunky, ugly looking plastic shroud around the column, and consequently, because that shroud cut into the dash fascia more, the speedo and tacho were smaller, and probably they also did that to bring the auxiliary gauges in. But actually, the client, and I kind of agree, suggested that maybe we go more Series 1. So what we've done is we've gone to a sort of backdate to a Series 1 column that just has a really simple wiper stalk that does indicate, flash and horn when you press it. So then we can use the Series 1 style column shroud, which is much smaller, and then go with the bigger Series 1 style speedo and tacho. Probably just going to be of the Smiths style, although we'll build new ones that have stepper motor drives and can take the CAN bus feed from the ECU we'll be using. And then basically 4 auxiliary gauges in the middle, again a nod to the Smiths ones. Client was quite keen on, in fact similar to the Interceptor, the Bentley organ stop style vents. So we're looking at potentially doing 4 of those in the centre. And then just a little, added a bit of flair on the dash in that there's a chrome strip that runs down the door which kind of points towards the middle of the dash but doesn't really flow into anything on the dash. And we thought it would be quite nice to run a bit of chrome down the dash, so we've introduced that onto the dash, sort of across but then kicking up to almost border the central instrumentation area. Incorporated a little badge into that chrome strip on the left. And then in the lower section, basically on the console and the bit where it meets the dash, which is the bit where Jag, I think, were mainly wide of the mark on the XJ. There was kind of a big cubby hole storage bit there, which, although no doubt practical, doesn't look particularly attractive. So we got rid of that completely and basically extended the console fascia right up to be below the dash. And then we've picked up a little design detail from the escutcheons around the door release handles. There's this quite Art Deco-y looking rib design on the chrome pieces there. And we thought we'd create a housing to put the Audison audio receiver controller that we're going to use in this car and the vintage air control panel that has 3 knobs for air direction, fan speed and temperature. And we thought we'd make a little chrome surround around that kind of just brought them together, made them look more intentional and tied in with another design detail on the car. Row of toggle switches, kind of a nod to how they were on the Series 1 XJ and the E-Type, but billet switches that look a lot nicer. There'll be momentary switches that can control the PDM, so for things like heated screen, it means we can introduce timers on it. So because the switches always return to normal, you can control the function separately to the position of the switch, if that makes sense. So you can click the switch momentarily to turn the rear heated screen on. There'll be a telltale light to say it's on, but we can program the PDM to knock it off after, say, 5 minutes, and you'll just see the light go back out again. So it does allow a bit more flexibility of programming to have the PDM system in combination with momentary switches. And then reasonably simple on the lower part of the console, simple gear shift gator, and then same billet switches for the windows. And I think it's looking really, really good, I have to say. It's quite nice when we're doing these sort of subtle, discrete projects. You know, when you're presented with a complete blank canvas, it can sometimes be somewhat daunting because it's like you just don't quite know where to start with the whole thing. But when you've got a bit of a target to aim for, it can sometimes make it a little bit more easy and almost more pleasurable. And I'm loving the way it's turning out now. I haven't presented this design to the customer yet, but he'll see this video and by that point he will have seen it. So hopefully he approves. So that's looking good. I think on that note, actually, I'm going to have a quick scan around. No doubt realise I've forgotten loads of things, but let's go down to the den and see what's going on down there. Welcome to the den. And actually, for some of you, you will have now been here because this is going out on the Sunday and yesterday will have been our launch event. So the day I'm filming this now is actually the Friday. So we're basically at maximum poo coming out stage, and with quite a lot of people looking like they're going to come. The weather looking anywhere between either really sunny and hot or torrential thunderstorms, but we'll find out tomorrow, and you will some of you will experience whatever that turns out to be. So things are looking pretty cool. We've got a few more display cars to come in here. Yeah, I'm going to move my old banger of an E30 out of here. We have this awesome Ligier LMP2 car, which is one of the cars we were keeping as a bit of a secret for the day. We've got this. It's all right, mate. Come through. There's a coffee machine, man. Roundstone coffee, excellent service every time. Espresso. That's my sized espresso you got there. Yeah. We've got this absolutely awesome broad-speed Mark 1 Escort. So this is one of the actual X-Works cars, owned by a local chap. It's just fresh from a restoration, not by Retro Power, I hasten to add, by somebody else, and it looks like they've done a very nice job indeed. Running the little 1300 BDH twin cams that these ran. In period, these revved up to 11,000 RPM and made over 200 horsepower, which, if you sort of think of that in terms of this was in the 60s, and it's a 1300, and just get your head around that for a minute. Mustang's looking awesome. That's going to be doing some displays, alignment displays with absolute alignment. We've got the Quattro up on the ramp, and then later today we are going to be having Dave Rowe's Grumpy, as it's called, Quattro in here, which is the Group S homage, if you like. I say Group S, and I always look at Jamie like he's scowling at me saying it's nothing to do with Group S. Well, maybe not, but anyway, it was the Quattro, a homage to the Quattro Audi built that then, or Audi's motorsport team built, that then got destroyed. Stratos is lurking there, ready to be displayed, and then we're going to have a Model A Ford next to that for absolute contrast. And then outside actually was Project Utah, which is going to be rolled in for the day as well. Up here, Richard has been on pretty much entirely with Allegro stuff, so it's all number 2 or number 1 Allegro, the orange car, and we've been on with everything. So you saw him putting together some of the components for the seat covers previously. Now all done. Front seats are done, rear seats are done. There's a little bit of steaming, stretching to do on them, but with rear seats it's always best to do that once they're actually in the car, because I know from experience, and Richard obviously knows from experience, that you get them all perfect, and then you put it in the car, and the slight compression that goes on it in the car then wrinkles the hell out of it, and you're like, no, okay, it looks terrible. So there's never much point doing the final tweaking on back seats until they're actually in the car. And then going through various interior components. So these are the 3D printed handbrake surrounds. There's a slot here which will be cut through later with a gator on it. This sits this way around, so the back seat's here, and there's a little cup holder, and then an ashtray, which this is just a 3D printed prototype, but these are actually machined on the final car. The gear surrounds, again, little machined ashtray going in there, little badge here that will have the gear gate information on it. And these are the door armrests, or at least the rear part of them. So we designed these to have grooves actually in the surface where the stitches, where the seams sit, and you can see the results of that just mean that it sits absolutely perfect. Once you've done the skived edges before doing the seam, and then you've got a groove to sit it into, it just sits so nicely. And then here there's going to be an insert, which we talked about many episodes ago, which magnets on, which will have the tartan pattern that we've got on the seats on it. Then that sits on the door card. In fact, the door card's conveniently right next to me, which are also all done. And then there's a machine section at the front, which is going to be anodised aluminium, which has got the kind of the pull handle that you use to shut the door, and it has the positions for the electric window buttons on it. So all coming together really, and then he's working on visors and headliner. So one of the headliners is done. They're being done in like a white vinyl, very much as the cars were originally. C-pillars, again, white vinyl to match the headlining. The only sort of interesting bit on those is originally they have like a heat sealed seam around the back edge, which obviously we don't have the capability to do, so that is replaced with an actual stitched seam. I think that's probably true of the sun visors as well, which I think last episode we showed Rich actually remaking the structure of those. But again, they would originally have just had a heat sealed seam around them, but it's replacing that with first a seam all the way around, but leaving a pocket open at the top. You can slip the piece in and then hand stitch the top part. And that is that. Very nice. You could be an airline attendant. So yeah, that's where Richard's at. This is the bit where I would normally walk over here and say, hey, we've got this event coming up on the 21st. Everybody come, but it's happened. It was yesterday. So we'll replace that with, if you want your car working on here in the den, whether it be an upholstery job, whether you want to talk to us about maintenance work, upgrade work, detailing, or if you have a car club, for instance, or just a group of mates that you like to do road trips with and you wanted to pop in here as part of your trip or as an excursion with your car club, just drop us an email, info@thedenautomotive.co.uk, or go on the website and find the link to the same, and you can speak to Nick and discuss your requirements. And we hope to see you here very soon.
What, emergency, yeah? I'll be in 10 minutes. Just gotta fire the Aston up.